Welcome to my view from the piano bench. We do this on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. here on my Joe Holt's Notes YouTube channel, in addition to Piano for My Friends on Thursday evenings. On Wednesday evenings, we explore topics and things that I hope will be inspirational to you, whether you're a musician or not. You probably know the drill. And if you're one of the people who continues to support and encourage me via the links you'll find on the support page of my website, thank you very much. Those drops in the tip jar essentially sponsor these videos, and if you do watch with some regularity, I'll ask that you check that out. Different options. And we're still here. On Wednesday nights, I move the phone camera a little closer to me so that I don't feel I have to shout across the room. You don't see much of the piano, but it's not as necessary. Focus is not as much on playing. And I'm going to try to speak extemporaneously on a topic I've never quite organized this way, but it seems like a good approach to fulfill a request of somebody who watches. You know who you are. That I talk about Bill Evans. And my first response to that is I'm not prepared to talk about Bill Evans, but I think I can explain that and create a context in which that makes sense. Bill Evans happens to be this person's favorite pianist, and many people's favorite pianist, and certainly an inspiration to me. So I've titled this video Bach, Fats, and Bill. And if you weren't sure who the Bill was, it's pianist Bill Evans. And if you weren't sure who the Fats was, because there are more than one Fats, you might think Fats Domino, but I mean Fats Waller. And those three musicians to me represent something similar. A little bit of a different version of this phenomenon, but the phenomenon of being completely definitive for their time in terms of what they did, what they created, what they, you could say, perfected. Johann Sebastian Bach, his lifespan dates what we call the Baroque period. And what I would say is anybody who came after Bach had to do something different. He took everything around him and codified it, and also just created the basis, the structure of modern music that continues in Western culture to this day. And I'm taken by a recent Pat Metheny comment that he made in the Rick Beato interview. He said, compared to Bach, we all suck. And a little bit of thought to that doesn't take you long to agree with Pat Metheny. And I take inspiration in Bach. I take inspiration in Bill Evans. But what I found in Fats Waller, for me, was a starting point for jazz. So I could say about Fats Waller what I said about Bach. He took what was around him and he took it to that very highest level. What came after him evolved from that and had to not be that. And then Bill Evans, in terms of defining the jazz vocabulary, that pretty much everything evolved from that point. Now, of course, you can trace it back, and some people kind of skip Bill Evans and just trace it back to the bebop vocabulary. Right? And let me say, I'm leaving a lot of people out. I'm omitting a lot of things, and this is purely my own observation and opinion, devoid of some knowledge and devoid of some context. But it makes sense to me to see these three people as similar figures. So first, let me talk about it in terms of Fats Waller. So when I became aware of jazz, which I was 13 or 14 years old, and I was introduced to first Teddy Wilson and then Fats Waller. through recordings that the Mediri brothers steered me to. And I immediately grabbed onto or paid notice to what Fats Waller was doing. And probably the Mediris pointed me to Fats Waller specifically because the first music they heard me play was ragtime music. And it really isn't a stretch to say, well, that ragtime left hand is kind of a, starting point, a really good place to jump off from in terms of the older stride piano styles. And Teddy Wilson really wasn't a straight ahead, well, this is a term that's never been put together before, or terms, straight ahead stride pianist, talking about the approach to stride. But Fats Waller was. And because I paid so much attention to Fats Waller in terms of listening to records, and the more I listened, the more I grabbed, and the more my approach to stride piano evolved because of that. I would consider myself a stride player, and there are people who absolutely call me, stride players. So far, among the reviews for the Blossom Deary CD, more will be coming, but so far, one of the reviewers, and this is funny in a way, because it's coming only from what I played on the Blossom Deary CD, which is very little stride, okay? But she or he called me a full stride player. I stay away from that because I understand now that if you really want to have a comprehensive grasp of stride, you have to go back before Fats Waller. Even though you could say that James P. Johnson and Willie the Lion Smith and others were part of the evolution to Fats Waller, and Fats Waller kind of contained everything. You could argue that. But there's a whole lot of things I can't represent. It would be like me calling myself a classical pianist, but the only thing I was willing to ever play or even understand or care about was Debussy. And I didn't want to play Beethoven. I didn't want to play Haydn or Mozart. And I didn't even know who they were, right? And I also see the modern day practitioners of stride be extremely knowledgeable. Emmett Cohen, who's ridiculous, and doesn't play stride in a pure historical narrative kind of sense. I mean, he does play it historically, rhythmically, but he doesn't do it harmonically the way those guys would do it. He's not one of these people who's going to recreate stride. There are people who do it. But I developed my concept of stride through Fats Waller. I would consider myself, and I don't know if anyone has used this term before me, but a neo-stride player. And I would put myself in the category of Dave McKenna, who I can make some of it happen, but I just don't live there. I'm not a gigantic student of it. But that the Fats Waller style, the Fats Waller approach really epitomizes stride. And I don't think that many people would disagree with that, right? And Fats Waller has drawn a lot of people to him, a lot of pianists. Fats Waller transcriptions are played all the time. Now so are Jelly Roll Morton and Willie the Lion and James P., but probably Fats Waller more so. Now Bill Evans there's another place that people gather around for the very important reason of what he did harmonically. Kind of taking the harmonic vocabulary, taking the approach to chords, and basically making them more expansive, creating more sophistication and nuance in what we call open voicings. So one thing, if you're not a pianist, but let's say you know what a chord is. It's a C major chord. A closed voicing would be the notes of a chord played in the span of no more than an octave, less than an octave. So basically, as close together as you can play the notes of a chord. And if you've heard of like root position, first inversion, second inversion, or third inversion if you have a fourth note, those would be closed voiced chords. Open voiced chords the span of more than an octave. And I'm not even sure if you can see that far up. But if you can, there would be a chord. This one has 6 notes. Open voicing chords, if you had to like make a typical number of notes, you might say 5, but 5 or 6. Okay. And the one advantage of having an open voice chord is to be able to have extensions, to have notes beyond the triad or even the 7th. In this case, the 6-9, and I wound up doubling the 5th. So let me get rid of that. Get rid of that note. Now, what if I did this? I changed this to this, and I did this. There's an open voice chord. But what if I did a chord like this? Now, this would be an altered kind of a chord, one that you would hear all the time coming out of Bill Evans. And what he took to the next level and further was the architecture, and I think that's the word he used, of building chords. And now the idea of the really hip chord voicing was a thing. Now let me insert something that some of you have heard me say before. When I encountered Blossom Deary's piano playing for the first time, and I have to be honest, when Sharon approached me about Blossom Deary's, doing the Blossom Deary project, I knew of the voice of Blossom Deary. I did not even know she self-accompanied. And ultimately how important she was, because she was doing those open, reconstructed, what we would call quartal, with notes being a 4th interval apart, some foundational notes underneath, which is a whole different sound than, or this, or even this. Okay. But then, like that chord I played that kind of epitomized Bill Evans would also have epitomized Blossom Deary. And from everything I read, Bill Evans was a fan of Blossom Deary and apparently influenced by what she did. And of course that makes Blossom Deary important in the history of jazz piano. But we give really all the credit, well, a lot of credit to Bill Evans. And the reason that I don't feel equipped to talk about Bill Evans is that my internal process breaks down when it comes to internalizing and in essence memorizing those vertical structures. I would call this a vertical structure. It's a stack of notes, as opposed to a horizontal or linear structure. proud of myself. I missed the note, but had the presence of mind to skip it and keep going. So yay for me in that regard. I would call that a more horizontal structure. A linear sequence of notes, two at the same time. And in the case of Bach, could be three, could be four melodies at the same time, which gets all real tricky. And I used to really long to understand, get myself around Bill Evans. This is years ago, because I perceived it as a deficit. What I didn't understand was, probably not entirely unrelated to why I could never be a performing classical pianist, because my brain doesn't work that way. Not that it's exactly the same thing, but in some similar, at least general concept way, my brain doesn't work that way to focus on horizontal structures. I need to find them through, that's a horizontal, vertical structures. I need to find them through the horizontal structures, if that makes sense. So I played that first phrase of the Bach two-part invention in C, and I played a note wrong. You know how many thousands of times I played that? I learned a number of the Bach two-part inventions in my, kind of cramming for my college audition and, catching up on things that I didn't learn before that when I was, I guess, 17, right? And I auditioned on this one. And I'll stop. And I know I can't play that all the way through from memory, because I haven't really tried to play it a whole lot lately. And even if I haven't tried to play it in the last 3 days, that would be enough for me to forget it. This first inversion, I've gotten the idea, and I'll talk more about this down the road when I have it better worked out. I've gotten the idea to make it a goal to play that entire first inversion on all 12 keys. And that is actually because I can see that playing to how I approach playing, how I hear playing, how I want to manipulate the movement of, half and whole steps and see their distinction and understand leading tones when they occur. And I've always been drawn to polyphony. But the only reason I didn't have a prayer of memorizing this and playing this all the way through, no matter how many zillions of times I've played it or tried to memorize it or worked to memorize it, is because I'm doing it so much and I'm doing it in different keys. So I may try to demonstrate it, but that's laughable if I were to actually want to be a classical pianist. But that stuff doesn't stick in my head, and I'm okay with that, because I have this very slippery Teflon ice skating rink up here in the improvisation sense. And so that's what I run with, and it's all melodic. And, if I try to hang on to structures this way, it just tanks everything. But let's just see, since I'm, probably embarrassing myself in all sorts of ways, let's see what happens if I try the Bach two-part invention and see all the way through. Now, if I put it in front of me, I could pull it off, I'm not a classical pianist, but I practice this stuff every day because it informs me, it helps me, but I'll never perform it. Although if I could come up with an approach to improvising on some of these inventions, I would do it. I have an idea for one of them, but that's another subject. Now I'm slowing it down so I can really be attentive. So why am I talking? brain is just like, it's mush. Yeah. But that's okay. I'm not trying to be a classical pianist. I'm trying to be a better improviser. And internalizing that, let's say D flat. Let's see. I missed one. Okay. Again, the memorizing thing. But internalizing that is a practice strategy. And it's one that I assigned to myself. So if I can get that and keep it in my memory, because I actually put the music in front of me when I do it, so I can remind myself of it, I'll report back, right? But those are places for me to grow. That's something for me to look at and learn from. And so is Bill Evans. Something for me to look at and to learn from. And this particular voicing, I've kind of paid attention to. And I had a conundrum in doing the Blossom Dearie project, because I knew I needed to represent some of those voicings, but I also knew that I didn't play that way and just couldn't snap my fingers and make myself play that way. And of course, that wasn't the point, to play like Blossom Dearie, but it is the point to honor the lane in which she traveled. A beautiful quote was made about Sharon in terms of Blossom Dearie's voice and Sharon's tribute, which was, Sharon Sable is the perfect singer to pay tribute to Blossom Dearie. And after he made some descriptions of her voice, he said, adding to her legacy rather than trying to recreate her voice. So that's what I hope I did. But a couple of the tunes, I won't tell you which ones. You listen to the recording if you haven't, or download the CD. Go to the Blossom Dearie Project tab on my website or on Sharon's. They both go to the same place. So I wrote out some of those voicings for some of the tunes. And even though I've played them a bunch of times, like if Sharon, I'll just say Little Jazzbird was one, where I wrote out the voicing for the whole beginning section, and she'll call it on a gig, and she don't need the music, and to play the tune, no, but to play the voicings, yes, I do. And if I try to recreate it, I'm going to go south, and of course that's stuff I learned from. I will never, entirely play piano like Blossom Dearie. I'll never entirely play piano or play anything like Bach. Fats Waller I can come closer to, but not in the virtuosic sense. I don't think I'll ever learn the arrangement of handful of keys. But all of these things are things not to recreate, but to look at it in terms of, these kind of represent the epitome of their things at their time. I would definitely say that about all three, right? And so it's interesting, since I've talked about Teddy Wilson, the Benny Goodman Trio in 1930 something or other had a recording of Handful of Keys. However Teddy Wilson did it, he did not do this. But I've not been able to bring myself to be comfortable representing Fats Waller and not striding, at least to some degree, like that, Like, the one James P. thing I look at, and I'll never play clean from the transcription. Now, I haven't tried to play that for a while, so that wasn't memorized, that was approximated. But I'd love to be able to play it like this. That was horrible. Somebody who watches this doesn't like when I do that, right? And when I perform, I will never say that's horrible. You know, and hopefully it'll never be horrible. Of course, sometimes, you know. But what I'm trying to do is demonstrate something, and I'm leaving myself vulnerable to do it, right? And if I don't demonstrate it well, I think I owe it to you to say I did not demonstrate that well. But actually, I can launch from this into something. Performance and practice are two different things. And if you're performing, then you have to be in the position where you are fully in command and control of what you're doing at all times, because you're making a statement. If you're practicing, or related to that, if you're demonstrating something, you know, you're doing something that you don't necessarily have full control over, so it may not work. So if it doesn't work the first time, you need to do it again, right? And so I hope that, you know, I imagine that most people here understand, you know, the hat I'm wearing on Wednesday nights is a different hat than the hat I'm wearing on Thursday nights. Now, do I feel less than satisfied with some of the Thursday night performances, the videos? Absolutely I do. And if I start them and I'm not really in the space, I'm struggling the whole time to find the space. And then I'm just like, ugh, by the end. Then I listen to it and it's like, okay, I can live with that. But not happy with it. But I never tell you what I'm happy with or not happy with. Actually, in a way, you can kind of tell at the end by what I'll say. Like I'll say, oh, good grief, you know. Or, you know, maybe I'll just be all enthusiastic. This, yeah. You know, but I'm not going to say that sucked. And I'll never say anything I perform sucks, because hopefully it never sucks. But if I try to demonstrate something, especially something I don't really know well, but I'm trying anyway, it very well could suck. Because we've all got a lot of practicing to do, right? So, fortunately, you know, I'm at the place where, you know, failure to not suck, you know, does not get in my way, attitudinally or otherwise. I always come back to ain't misbehaving though for Patswell. So, I think what I've said so far is that I recognize the value, the historical importance, and the musical necessity for what I do in honoring and learning from and growing in the traditions of these three musicians, what they represent, and their specific contributions. I will tell you what I haven't figured out, or what I figured out the least, is how to work on the open voicings. Because what I was taught when I studied for 3 years with Don Glanton, which is very interesting, and it's kind of like a classical. When you study jazz, you're studying it often being pieced together like you would classical music, and that doesn't work for me in jazz, because it really doesn't work for me in classical music either, and it's why I'm not a classical music player. So, like, you have a voicing, whatever that voicing is, and you work it around the keys. But here's my issue with that, and I can tie this back to Bach now. My issue with that is it represents something isolated from the context. Because the context is created by the melodic movement, the phrase. Harmony for harmony's sake, it never sat in with me. And I'm at the point where I used to feel deficient about that. And now I'm like realizing that, you know, I'm woefully deficient all over the place, as we all are. And it's not my deficiencies that define me, because I'm just in the same, we're all in the same boat with that. It's what I do have a handle on. That's my unique contribution. So, devoid of context or not being part of a tune, the melody, the linear movement of the melody, is what grounds me. Right? And I understand that much better now. But when I was in college, and I started college in the late 1970s, because I really was never deeply into rock, I wasn't attracted by the fusion movement in jazz, which started in the 70s. But Chick Corea and Miles Davis, actually in the late 60s. Right? And part of the motive for Miles was to attract the audience out there that wasn't there for swinging jazz, and that audience was aging, and Miles kept reinventing himself. And a lot of musicians my age, I can think of one, Steve Pascrone, a great bass player from Philly, who I got to work with last week, and I really respect him. And I think it goes both ways. I'll talk about him someday. But I just recall a conversation years ago where, he was drawn into jazz because he was an electric bass player. Bitches Brew, the kind of groundbreaking or initial or whatever, the Miles statement in that regard, in fusion. Since rock music wasn't attractive to me, it didn't draw me in. But the harmonic vocabulary was also playing out, not just in the fusion world. And Bill Evans, was not in the fusion world. He was with Miles Davis before that. And so for me, my sort of cutting edge in the 70s, when, late 70s, when Bill Evans was still alive, was what Bill Evans was doing. Because he was playing standards or, tunes that evolved from standards, stuff that he wrote, but stuff that could be directly traced. And that was modern. They were just different stylistic things of modern. So for me, it was Bill Evans that was, making me feel like I don't understand jazz at So why do I call myself a jazz player? It's a different, somewhat similar though different than like listening to Art Tatum for the first time and saying I give up. But it was just like, it was all too complex for me. And I've told this story before, so some of you've heard it, but I went to Al Stauffer, who's an icon in Philadelphia, a bass player, who respected everybody, and he was genuinely encouraging to everyone. And he reminded me of how I came up in jazz, starting with the stride style and approach. And I was playing, things that have evolved from that. And he just encouraged me to keep going, figuring the things out I could figure out in the manner that I was. In other words, don't try to reinvent my wheel. Although I didn't really come to that conclusion using that phrase until some years later, after studying with Don Glander for 3 years and realizing I can't actually go with everything he's saying. Although I learned from him, I can't reinvent my wheel. And so the Al Stauffer advice to just continue evolving has really, really, really served me well. But Bill Evans was that marker for me. And if I'm going to create some voicings, have done had I thought about this, because again, this person who doesn't like me to say, everything I play, it doesn't like me to say that not everything I play is great. That wasn't great. That actually didn't get to where I would have liked it to, but then that's not my thing. But I should write out some stuff to demonstrate it. But I'm capable of arriving at some interesting stuff through progressing through, but arriving at it through melodic channels, which is why I like the idea of like some crazy goal by the time I get to the end of my life, which this is too big of a goal, but you learn all the Bach two-part inventions in all the keys. And of course, that's not open voicing, but what that does is that, and I'd love to learn some three-part stuff and move that around keys, because I can just see that transforming my playing. So I just keep talking now about the unique contributions of Bill Evans, his architecture, of Bach, his melodic perfection and his polyphonic perfection, and then Fats Waller's taking stride piano to this epitome level. And yeah, those three players, right? So I'm affected. So if I want to directly address my friend's request to talk about Bill Evans, I can't sit here and dissect it. I can dissect Fats Waller a lot easier than I could dissect Bill Evans. But the recognition that this is, for what that is, the gold standard. Yeah, let's say that. Fats Waller, Bill Evans, Bach, the gold standard. Now, of course, this is art. This is subjective. Wouldn't surprise me if not in the comment in a private message, somebody kind of vehemently disagrees with me. Okay, fine. But makes sense to me. I went through this little, binge period a while back where I took the Bill Evans Sunday at the Village Vanguard recording, and I listened to it for like weeks and weeks, over and over and over, the CD. I remember that particular year I took down my Christmas tree to that recording. For some reason that was appropriate. And I listened and I listened and I listened. I'll tell you, that doesn't have the same effect on me though as listening to Oscar Peterson or listening to some similar things where I could just break down and cry. Now, I'm positive Bill Evans will do that to some people. It doesn't do that to me. Neither does Bach. But that has no bearing on the genius of those things. So it's like recognizing what we can learn from and then knowing who we are. But who am I really? Stylistically, I'm really not Fats Waller. And I'm certainly not Bill Evans. But I'm in the middle. Now, if you want to look at those three in terms of history, of course, Bach is a long time ago in classical music history. Then you have Fats Waller. But then if you embrace my premise that you may have heard me say before, that the history of jazz, technically, harmonically, theoretically, is just the same as a history of classical music, but sped up 5 times, right? So the distance in jazz between Bach and Bill Evans is not that far off from the distance, sort of like, dog years. Like a dog lives 7 years, or a cat lives 4 years, something like that, for every human year. So you kind of take that concept and you can equate the distance between Fats Waller and Bill Evans to the distance between Bach and Fats Waller, in terms of how much evolution there is. And I never thought about that until now. Which is why I like just speaking off the cuff and saying something and realizing what I said, and then going from there on these videos, because I wind up taking myself places I wouldn't have thought of, and I also wind up learning things because I open my mouth and say something and it makes me go, huh? What? So now that I'm looking at that and I take those three, it's like, wow, perfect. Now, would there be another step beyond Bill Evans that would similarly be the distance between Bill Evans and Fats Waller? Well, if you look at the amount of time that has passed, yeah. And I don't listen to, contemporary things very much, and certainly not jazz in the very cutting edge cultural younger music place that it is today. And there's kind of no point in me doing that because that's not my culture and it never will be. But there could be a fourth pillar, whatever that is. And some of you could probably suggest what that fourth pillar is. And there could be, pillar prior to Bach, for sure. But those three, Bach, Fats Waller, Bill Evans. Fats Waller. So that was interesting. Because I had an agenda at times during that, I veered off a little bit, from center, and the agenda was to try to incorporate, concepts or contributions that I would glean from Bach and glean from Bill Evans, and stick in the middle of Fats Waller. But stylistically, it's Fats Waller. Actually, stylistically, it's Dave McKenna, Okay, here's a little window in. About 3/4 of the way through, I had a distraction in my head, and I started thinking about something else, which is usually a good thing. But I'm recording this late at night, and in that case, a distraction just sort of like, so the best time for me to play, the best creative space is first thing in the morning. And I think that's true for most people, because you're waking up and you still have access to that, dream space, basically. You're coming out of this, altered brainwave thing, and it's not far from you. And by the middle of the day, that's pretty lost, unless you have techniques or ways to get back to it. But yeah, I remember saying to Jeff Galante, a young trumpet player who's in his 20s now, but when he was, like 13 and 14, I played a lot with him then. And he would listen to what I would say. And one of the things that he really latched onto was that fatigue is really good for creativity. And I was fatigued a lot. And that's when I was like legit falling asleep many nights on the way home from gigs, and just working really hard to stay awake. Burning the ends of both candles, or whatever. But burning the candle at both ends. Or the ends of both candles, or both ends of both candles, right? But what that does is that loosens your grip on what you're holding on mentally. But there's a downside to that. But that reminds me of a piano student I had years and years ago, way back when I taught a lot of piano and went to homes. This would have been in like the 1970s and into the 80s a little bit. But started when I got a driver's license in 1977. Okay? and I would have student recitals. I would have them in the church that I served in. And this particular adult student was an emergency room doctor, and he worked, nowhere near his home, and he worked 36-hour shifts. And he came to a recital from one of his shifts. He walked in and said, "Joe, who needs drugs when you've got fatigue?" Which I thought was a cute, curious statement, but I can see more value in it now. And I reference this in terms of the video, the self-medicating video, that I wondered if I should have put out, but I did. It's out there now, right? And I would say, who needs drugs? Who needs drugs? When I have music. Funny, I forgot how it went just there. So I had to make it up. And that's ridiculous. I should be able to quote, "That's the easiest pop piece in the world." Come on, Joe. Arguably not even. Anyway. Okay, that's better. Okay, I have to remember now. I'll let myself maneuver. See, I can't try to do a hip voicing because it won't work. I have to. It has to happen on its own. So now it kind of breaks down. I'm thinking, okay, well, I should try to find some nice voicings, and then I should play it in stride. Oh, what's that? Over the river and through the woods. Oh, really? So here's my brain run amok. Does "Over the River and Through the Woods" have the same harmonic structure as the little Bach minuet? Let me see. Because that's where I went. Through the woods and grandma's way home. The horses the way that carry the sleigh. Through something there's snow. Yeah. Ha! "Over the River and Through the Woods" could be a contrafact of the Bach minuet in G. Meaning, or close enough, but this is just amusing to me now. Meaning that you can take the structure of one tune and superimpose something else over it. One that I do all the time in the shows is I play I've Got Rhythm. I play Meet the Flintstones. I put my major second interval in the wrong place. Joe, you should be able to transpose this. The B flat. Apparently not. Alright. So much to practice, right? What a wonderland of possibilities. I had a couple of lessons I taught the other day that were really fun because the people involved were just enjoying the discovery so much, you know, and I was enjoying the discovery with them. You know, I love just like pointing people. I don't have the answers, you know, but I think I can make suggestions as to what questions to ask so that you can find some answers, right? And that's really cool. So I don't know if I really broke any ground or anything, but hopefully you found something interesting in that discussion, and it was interesting for me to just talk about those 3 points of inspiration and where the center is for me. It's all cool. So thank you for encouraging me along the way. Different ways of encouraging, of course. But if you haven't considered the very modest, support thing, I know that I don't offer like Patreon tiers and stuff. What I offer if you go to Patreon is that I will send you content every month. And sometimes I do mess up and send it late. The one-man administrative thing here is always a challenge, especially when more things keep happening in the coming weeks, especially next month. Whew, I'm so looking forward. So thank you for being here and sharing the journey with me. I'm so grateful. Hope to see you soon.